All right, everybody. Welcome to the June episode of the Maturity Model for Microsoft 365 Practitioners. I can read it on the slide because that's a lot of words. We're talking about the management of content competency today. We've done a session about this probably. I think we realized it was probably about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, it was, isn't it? Yeah.
So we wanted to revisit it for those of you who weren't around for that, and also because some of our thinking has changed because of the way the technology has moved, because of the way we think about the world. We're not in the depths of a pandemic right now, so the way we think about things are a little bit different than they were back then.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. So our agenda is to go over the usual over the model and what it's all about. We'll do together modes and picture time, and talk about how you can contribute towards a maturity model, and then talk about the main event. Well, you can join us every month, except not the next 2 months, eh? So we'll talk about that in a minute. But you've already on this on this session, so you'll have this invite. But if you don't, you can join us by clicking on that ak.ms invite, and that'll give you access to a calendar series. You can also join up via Meetup as well. So if you want to let Meetup kind of prompt you when things are happening. This plus all the other great 365 and Power Platform community events, then click on that and sign up through Meetup. I think it's growing quite nicely, that group. So what's the purpose of all this, Mark?
What is the purpose of all this? Well, we started with the maturity model, or the SharePoint maturity model, years ago, and we've expanded on it because Microsoft 365 is a much broader surface. So we have a set of published competencies, which are the purple column. I think we're up to about 10 of those, maybe 12. We have some practical scenarios that help you think about how to apply some of these competency and maturity concepts to specific areas of Microsoft 365. It's more of a, how did I use this set of ideas to address a specific problem? If you have any ideas around that, we would love to hear them. There's some tools, some competencies we're still working on. There will probably continue to be new competencies over time, though we feel like we're pretty well covering the surface area, and there's always a lot of discussion about, well, should these two be joined together, and should these be split apart, or should we have primary and secondary? I know that Kevin Stocky is on the call, and he's given us some great ideas about how we might start thinking about changing the way the framework hangs together, and we're always open to those ideas. So how can you use this stuff? Well, you can you take these ideas and use them within your organization to help sort of have people think about how you use Microsoft 365 from a maturity perspective. You can take the levels and say, sort of, well, where are we in this set of competency, or sorry, in the levels within a particular competency we want to focus on, and how should we get to the next level? How do we get better at this? This may be a set of articles and ideas that you can use to discuss, how you move forward with your senior management. Sometimes slideware and words is more useful than the discussion of the specific technologies. A way to socialize how you just want your organization to understand about Microsoft 365 and how it's used and what purposes it can serve. How can you benchmark things? How do you know that you're getting better if you don't have a framework that you can apply? All of those things are potential uses of this. We've intentionally kept things rather loose and open-ended, and we've done that because we want you to be able to use these ideas in whatever way makes sense within your organization.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And it, we kind of want you to feel like we're all in it together, don't we? To kind of persuade the powers that be that what we're saying is great stuff, and helping them tackle the challenges as well. So yeah, if you've got so again case studies and ideas which you've used and would make sense to put into the maturity model, then that will help allow us to be able to get those great projects agreed upon and do some great stuff. So the maturity model is split up into 5 levels. Starting at level 100 up to 500. Level 100 is sort of that default position that organizations are in, where they haven't really put any energy into trying to understand how they can improve that competency. But in the middle, we've got some characteristics around each of the levels. Level 1 being sort of chaotic and uncontrolled. Level 200, there's some kind of realization that actually, we do need to make some changes. This is causing us pain, and so there's effort to start to make some changes and start trying things out. But there's still at that level, things are we're reacting to things, so we're firefighting. It might be that somebody individually is managing it, or a very small subsection of the company is doing bits and pieces, but it's not consistent across the organization. Level 300, it's things are documented, they're much more controlled and more stable. This is sort of the level that if you're going to sort of work on a competency, we think you should be at. And then level 400, so we start looking at how we can improve things. We're measuring, we're getting feedback, we're starting to enhance the capability, the competency by looking at what's going on, what's working, what's not working, and making changes. And then level 500 is that sort of nirvana, optimal level where everything is fantastic and it's automated, and it's maybe coming up with things before we thought of them, not so many organizations get to that level.
And I think one important point to make here, Simon, is that everybody shouldn't aim to be level 500 at everything. That would just be unrealistic and probably not necessary. Really, what you want to do is look at each competency and say, where are we and where would we like to be because of the kind of organization that we are. If you work at a small family business, you may never even aspire to be higher than level 200 if you on any given competency. If you work at a very regulated, statutory driven organization, you may need to aim for level 400 for some legal reasons, if nothing else. So there really is no specific high water mark that you have to reach. We like to think, especially with the management of content competency, that level 300 is a nice place to be. You're going to be getting enough out of the platform that it's worth the investment, and you'll have processes that are improved over time.
Brilliant. Right. So it's getting to that moment then. If you could turn on your cameras, I will fight with my computer on this side.
And don't be shy. See, we'd love to have more and more and more people on this, so that we can prove to Vesa Juvonen that we have as big a crowd as he does when he does his calls. We'll never get there because he's famous and everybody wants to talk to him. But
that's not good. Right, here we go. Right.
Go teams, go. Went into a dark auditorium.
For that one, right. I will start recording. Right, so have I got my camera on? Yes. Has everyone else got their cameras on? Brilliant. Right, we'll start recording. Wave, everybody.
I see some friends out there. It's nice to see the faces with the names. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Right, I can stop that. And then I can just move that out of the way. Right.
Simon's like the organist at a church, just like playing away madly in the background, trying to get this to work the right way. Awesome. Right, thank you.
Okay, cool. I just need to find, I've lost my PowerPoint presenter bit. There we go. Right, let's move over to here. So how can you get involved? We'd love to get you involved, and thank you for those who have. It's been great to get Kevin's feedback. That great video. So you can get involved. You could present a case study. Maybe there was something which was in the maturity model which helped you get that project agreed upon and over the line. Great to hear about that. You can contribute on GitHub. You could update grammar. I think we made a few updates to the management of content competency. Give us ideas, feedback, issues, thoughts through there. Just sharing the content, socializing it, letting us, letting other people know what was useful and how it helped you. That'd be fantastic. You can see all of the previous recordings on that link there. They're all via YouTube, and there's also a link to the Excel workbook, which is how to run the maturity model for Microsoft 365 workshop. So let me go through. Right. This is the last one for us, isn't it, Mark? For
last
summer?
One for the summer. Yeah, we decided that we would be lazy during the summers because most people are, and it's just we don't get much of a crowd. We tried it even during the pandemic. We didn't get a huge crowd in June and July, or July and August. So we decided to take those months off. We'll be back on September 17th, which happens to be my birthday.
Oh, amazing.
With a practical scenario around this thing that I don't know if any of you have heard about. It's called Copilot. If any of you ever. So we'll see what we can come up with there. We would love your thoughts on that particular session. And as Simon said, if any of you have used the model and you want to talk about how it worked in your organization, we would love to get you on the calendar, even though we do have some things booked out to the rest of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to October as well, when we sort of thinking about the future and how the mature organizations kind of manage the future and changes. Right. So as Mark said, it's his birthday on September 17th, so that'll be the next session after this one, talking about Copilot. Thank you very much for all the May attendees. It's great. It's lovely to see familiar names and faces, and if you want to get involved in the community, then you've got access to training sessions, how to contribute for the first time, how to write community docs, and how to write for the web in a sort of an accessible way through that aka.ms/sharing is caring. Right, so on to the main event. So this one, we'd certainly love you to get involved, and sort of, even if it's just reacting to what's being said. But we'd love to hear, hear what your thoughts are. If you've actually been, read it and used this competency. So please, if you want to do that, then raise your hand and come off mute and share your thoughts. So let's get to it. So the first thing we wanted to do was just sort of really talk about, or kind of set us all on the same page. So, the purpose of the management of content maturity model, or the competency, is to help us, subject matter experts and organizations, understand the impacts of, improving our management of content approaches, and to have be able to explain what we should be thinking about when we think management of content. And there is a link to the current management of content competency, which Marc we've made some updates, haven't we? So
yesterday's changes did get published today. So
cool. Yeah. So that's great. So what do we, what is the scope of the content and maturity? And if you think, do you know what, this is, we've only got this, we should have other things, then please, come off mute and talk to us about it. But where the scope at the moment is around, the content creation. So, how do we create content? We've got then the content lifecycle. How do we manage content through its lifecycle from creation, consumption, revision, and then to its demise? It's through maybe things like retention policies and things. So that whole lifecycle process. Thinking about the presentation of content. My sort of branding, people in my organization, we're using the right fonts consistently, we're using the right imagery, thinking about how we present content in all its guises. We need to be able to find content. So how do we identify, how do we make it easier for people to be able to find it? And when they have found it, how do we make sure that it's that people understand what it is and whether it's the right version? And then the last one is how do we help, how can, about storage, how can users make sure that they know where to put content, where to start working with content, and how and where things might end up. So the storage of that. And so,
Simon, you probably noticed I added content creation onto this slide above content lifecycle. Creation is definitely part of that lifecycle, but I intentionally called it out because I think what we're seeing is a sea change in the way content is created. This is one of the Copilot plugs. So it's not just that people are using Copilot to summarize existing content, though that's important. What are my benefits as an employee? How do we do projects like X? But also, how are we starting to create content that is necessary to fill content gaps in our organization? That's changing right now. I don't know that there are a lot of people who are using Copilot as the creation tool, but I think there are a lot of people who are using it to change the way they think about that creation process, which is why I wanted to call it out specifically.
Yes, it's a very, very good point. And I don't think in in that competency at the moment we haven't got that pulled out, have we? So maybe that's something which we should do. I'd love to hear people's thoughts and feedback. Does anybody have anything else to add? Well, we'll just ask the question. Yes. Anyway, we'll move on to the next slide. Marc, do you mind covering this?
Sure. So this is just an overview of how we think about the different levels when we're thinking about the content management of content competency. So at level 100, I think this is where we often see organizations. When they first start using SharePoint Online, for example, they just sort of lift up the stuff that was on a shared drive and they drop it into SharePoint. And then they wonder, why isn't magic happening? Well, it's because there aren't a lot of content standards. There's still the same, deep folders. Everything's just a document. There aren't any real standards in how we're presenting things. It's views of document libraries. So that's a standard that doesn't actually add any real value. No real defined templates and styles. When I go to create something new, I find the old one and edit it and hope that our standards haven't changed. Content's stored all over the place or in one bucket. We've seen examples at Sympraxis of, a 15 terabyte document library. And we've also seen examples of so many document libraries that nobody knows where anything is. So we sometimes use the term Wild West here. It's just whatever happened. There hasn't been a lot of logic applied to it. There hasn't been a lot of thinking applied to it. At level 200, we've got some progression on that thinking. We've got a little bit of thinking about how that content is managed. There are some standards. We might have even created a few content types, for example, to cover some of the most commonly used types of content. We still have some difficulty finding things because we haven't enhanced a lot of the content with metadata. We haven't tuned search. We haven't really looked at the content from a usage standpoint. We've really looked at it primarily from a publishing standpoint. That's a common I think, mistake, especially on an intranet, is this is what everyone needs to know. which is very different than me saying this is what everyone needs to know versus everyone telling me as a HR manager or a finance person, these are the things I would like from you. When we get to level 300, we're starting to see a lot more content standards. We have things like a different concept of lifecycle management for a contract than we do for a benefits description, for example. We are thinking about, well, what should be a page, what should be a Word document, what should be a PDF, and why? Not just sort of randomly, which is more the level 100 approach. It's this kind of content is best presented this way for these reasons, and we have some criteria around that. We think about how we store things. So instead of lots of deep folders, for example, when we create custom-built document libraries that store specific kinds of content, we can have metadata in those document libraries that actually enhance that content and provide a better user experience. And then identification in the sense of, how do I find this stuff? So sometimes we use the words findability, putability, searchability. I think findability to me is the best word, because searching is not the point. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about, and this sort of crosses over into the search competency, to be honest, but we want to think about, what bookmarks should we have when people are looking for the benefits. In the U.S., we have healthcare as a benefit. In other countries, you might have a company car as a benefit or something else. So what's that document that people are going to want to find when they're searching for a specific thing? Have we given navigation to that thing? Is it searchable? Well, sorry, findable. And is it displayed in the place that people would expect it to be? So people are at the level 300. They basically know where things are and how to find them, and they can pretty much help themselves. Which means that a lot of the time that you might have spent at level 100 saying, oh, here's where this document is, or go look in that folder, or here's a link to this thing, a lot of that goes away because people are able to help themselves. At level 400, yeah, sorry.
Sorry. I also, just sort of to expand on that level 300, I think as well, is finding the content, but also people can find it because people know where to put the content as well. So it's sort of it goes in a consistent place. So that, I think that's also really, important as well. Yeah, that putability. But yeah, sorry, Mark, continue.
Great point. At level 400, and tell me if there are any good questions. I think I see some things in the chat, but when I'm talking, man. So at level 400, we start to bring in some of the advanced tools to manage content. This is where Copilot starts to really make sense. You've got your ducks in a row, and now you can start using some of the more enhanced tools. SharePoint Premium starts to make sense because you're at the level of content management where you actually want to do things the right way. You want to be able to archive content, for example, which is the SharePoint Premium feature. You want to be able to extrapolate metadata from content that's coming in, which is a SharePoint Premium feature. And I'm not trying to push SharePoint Premium. I'm just saying that I think at this level is where tools like SharePoint Premium and Copilot really start to make sense. You've got a good base. You've got good metadata. Your permissions are correct, which is a piece that sort of applies across all of this. How do you know what people can see? And with Copilot, that really matters. And then at level 500, ideally, you're getting some suggestions from the platform, not just from feedback from people. And that takes a very basic form in, what are people searching for? Looking at the analytics and having some reporting built on top of your analytics so that you know what people are searching for, what they're finding, what they're reading the most. The things that people are reading the most is probably the content that you want to be checking for freshness and correctness the most often. So you've got probably some reporting and some AI-ish kind of logic that applies to your content at that level where it's telling you this is the stuff you ought to be looking at this week or this month or this quarter. And you're getting hints from the platform in ways that you wouldn't otherwise have been getting.
I think level 500, that is the one which has shifted, hasn't it? Because I think before I think when we did this back in 2000, was it 21, wasn't it? 2021, I think, is when we presented this last time, and we were all about AI. Well, AI has now become so democratized and it's starting to push down. So yeah, it's really interesting how that has changed things.
The point about content types, I mean, I'm a SharePoint person from so far back that it's really sort of amazing. But I think content types are one of the most powerful and least used capabilities in this platform. And when you start to come up with consistent content types with augmented with good metadata, your content starts to really shine. And if you're not using content types, that's where you start. That's going to be the biggest step that you can use to move into a better place.
Yeah,
that's my prejudice, but I'm sticking with it.
Well, it's so true, isn't it? Like take things like procedures, and every department or area of the business will have its own procedures, but then having a consistent content type which can bring that all together into one place. I know we're sort of talking
and
about
and a template for those procedures and the right metadata, so that maybe we have an applies to piece of metadata. What kind of people does it apply to? When was the last review date? So if you're looking at something that's valid. All of that stuff is just critical for good content management.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Brilliant. The other, there's another question there about, do you have any thoughts and insights about applying this competency to an organization that has been recently acquired or merged with another company? Strategies for how to incorporate new content that may be structured very differently.
I have some thoughts. I mean, that becomes a bit of a hot potato, as we say. It can be a political battle or exercise or discussion. I think it's one of the things that in a merger or acquisitions situation doesn't ever happen well or early enough, is looking at all of the content and the language and the artifacts that each organization has, and trying to come up with a common way to think about it. There are some business objects like a contract that have a single name. No one's going to call a contract something different. And I'm sure someone's going to put up their hand and say, no, we call those agreements. But there are some consistencies. Other things that are more industry focused or more sort of niche are going to have different words and different. The other part of content types that's really important is the managed metadata, the terms that you use. That's sometimes historically has been called taxonomy or ontology. And what you call things, how you say the sentences, like, could you give me the contract for XYZ Corp that we signed in 1997? That is a sentence that's loaded with, what's the content, what's the metadata, what do we know about that particular object, so that I can solve that problem. 1997, geez, that's ancient history. But coming up with ways to sort of feather these two organizations, or however many it is, together, I think that's really important. I think coming up with common lingo between the two organizations is something often we'll do that next year, and then no one knows how to talk to each other, and that's a huge content management problem.
Yeah, and I guess it really, so much depends on how the merger is sort of taking place. If some parts of the business are going to come in and they're going to sit alongside, so that there's certain departments which are moving alongside one another, or some departments are being replaced, or if they are truly merging those departments together. But often often there's one part of the organization which wins, but they become sort of, I guess, the they become the master, I guess, of that area of the business. I guess, in terms of strategies, you've got to do analysis, haven't you? But you've got to understand how the departments are coming together, and then have a strategy around those. 'Cause it won't be just one strategy for all departments. It will depend on the capability of each department. But again, you can probably start using search to help bridge some of the gaps, to bring the content which is currently in two different places into one, and then merge those across as a way of starting to bring that stuff together. But ultimately, there's got to be some decisions made about which business processes are we running with. There's customers to be thinking about. So maybe that will take a long time, won't it, for those businesses to come together, and often they'll run with their own customers but separated. But I guess it really, a lot of it will depend on that merger. So apologies. Yeah.
It's interesting, when in the M&A activities that I've been involved in, there's usually like a finance working group, a facilities working group. They're pretty clearly called out, but there's never a content working group. There's never a terminology working group. I mean, that seems to me like it would be almost a no-brainer. It doesn't mean it's easy. It's probably really hard, but it's something that should happen just as early as all the rest of it.
That would be a great practical scenario, or wouldn't it? To be thinking about that.
Sure, we're inventing new stuff as we go.
Wouldn't be a competency
though. Carol just mentioned this is one of those, to me, the elephants in the room about content management. The comms team believes that AI will fix all of the findability issues. I think those of us who are in the information architecture business and have been doing this for a long time, we would say, if you don't have well organized, well categorized, well metadated content, AI is going to find whatever crap you've got under all of those rocks. Just like search has been finding that stuff, and people have been telling you that search is no good. I look at AI as just a really fancy search engine. I know that lots of people would disagree with me, but if I can't find this stuff with search, I'm not going to be able to find the right answers with AI. So I would say that AI in the form of Copilot.
Is that just me, or is it Marc just gone?
The AI didn't like what he was saying.
That's it. So I mean, I see that Daniel was disagreeing, but ultimately, I mean, the AI is going to be is going to, if it's got lots of content to reason over, and it finds it different, and it can't find the authoritative content, then it's not going to give you the search results back that you want. And funnily enough, I was speaking to an organization this morning, and so that is some of what they were seeing, where they were not getting back the documents which they were expecting, because they just had a lot of content which to read, and some of it was out of date. So they needed to look at getting rid of the content which is out of date, and bringing the content which is authoritative, which is the right stuff, in up to making that available to those AI engines. Because in the end of it, the Copilot is using a set of search indexes to return back this content. So Carol, that's, you're right. You have to be able to do some content management to ensure that AI can find the right stuff. And stories are the way to kind of be able to help your organization. So experiences from other people and what they've experienced with using AI for findability. One thing I will say is, if you can use things like custom copilots, where you're limiting the scope of what's being returned back, then that is a good way of being able to, you've got a specific data set, and you're going to get better results from that. Anyway, while we wait for Marc to rejoin us, and hopefully he will, let's go through the overview. So just talk about the impacts. I mean, there's a lot of text in here, but again, that level 100, we briefly talked about it when we were talking on the previous slide. But users, the impacts are users don't know where things should be stored at level 100, so they guess. There is this high cognitive load. It's such a Simon Hudson phrase, but because you've got different layouts and styles, it doesn't look like a Contoso type document, and so it's difficult for people, or harder for people, to consume that content. If we know where sort of how the structure of pages are, the documents are, then that's easiest for us to consume. This classic thing where you've got multiple copies of content with different version numbers or dates in the file name, and so it's harder to, again, there's cognitive load to find out which is the real, the latest updated document. And things like productivity is poor because people are recreating content because they can't find the previous version, and so that impacts the staff well-being as well, because they end up being busier because they expected to find that document and they couldn't, and then they recreate it. Moving up to level 200, although in this in the level 200 we're starting to make some progress, then the applications that are using that content have issues and mistakes are made, and again, it's still difficult for users to find where content should be stored, and so time is wasted, and there's still that cognitive load. But there are some attempts to introduce improvements, but the adoption of that hasn't reached a critical mass which we need it to for level 300. Move to level 300, now we've got content being used across business processes, and the applications which are consuming that content are much better. That those applications know where content exists or should be stored. Users themselves, because of the same reasoning, understand where content should be stored as well, and so therefore start finding it easy to find, and we start to get these real central sources of truth. Maybe we'd have content workspaces around not just departmental content, but assets to the business, customers or products. Moving up to level 400, I just need to move the slide over. Now we're starting to look at those improvements. So we're starting to measure how content's being used. We have the ability to improve productivity because we can put metrics in place to identify issues and act on those and make changes. And we're able to build sort of content-driven systems to improve those processes and make things better. And then moving to level 500, now we've got content that's being proactively managed by systems and being monitored. We might have using the metadata to kick off review processes. We might also then bring in application integration to kind of reduce down those silos and boundaries. And Marc is back. And content is stored predominantly at the function, the content type. So coming back to that idea that it's not just belonging to a particular department. It belongs to a sort of an asset class, and productivity is higher because people know where the content is and can use tools to help improve the quality of that content and identify issues with the content and make improvements. And the last one, but again, now this is moving down the chain, the value chain, where we talk about being able to using AI to tag content. Well, with SharePoint Premium and things like that, that's now becoming much more accessible than it was before. Marc, I've raced on ahead. Have you have anything to add to any of those level 400 or level 500? Or
nope. I'm sure that you covered it well. I apologize for disappearing.
No problem
I
at all.
I think that those two slides are for reading at another place. I mean, we captured way too many words in them.
It is true. It is true. Right. So this, one of the things which I absolutely loved when we did this management content is we came up with this kind of life cycle and showing a life cycle improvements over the maturity levels. So I wanted to make sure that we kind of covered that again, and also I think Kevin was talking about how content classification. So we might be able to sort of think about where that would sit in this life cycle and whether we need to call that out, because I don't think we quite talk about that, but we do mention the content types. But first of all, the initial level 100 is process is that we create some content and we publish it. And if we can, in the level 100, we don't know where the document is. We don't know the version of the document. We don't have any templates. So what format it's taking, what branding does it have applied to it, and also then we think about the storage aspect of it. It's not, we're not sure really who should be able to view and edit it. So we've got that sort of initial area, and particularly if we talk about that having that one bucket where everything lives, then how do you differentiate between what you're creating and publishing? But if we move to sort of level,
Simon, I mean, there is a positive to this level. I think we've gotten some feedback that some of our descriptions of these levels, especially at the lower level, are sort of negative, and that's true because we think everyone can do better. But at least here you're creating and publishing, right? You're doing something. You do have a process where you're creating and publishing content, but then that's it. So that's not so great, and that's where we go in the next level.
So yeah, so we pick out some of those pain points, and then we start to look about how we could change those. So in this level 200, we've got this idea that we start creating content in SharePoint sites, or maybe in our OneDrive, and then we're publishing that content into a team site. I think this is a SharePoint team site rather than a Microsoft team site, but it could be either, couldn't it? So, and so we've got this kind of this move, and the thing about it in the level 200 is that there'll be some people in the organization doing this, but it's not it's not consistent across the organization. But yeah, the information architecture is useful, but local. If we move into a 300, and this is kind of what we certainly promote this, where we might start creating content. We start creating content in a SharePoint site. So this might be actually a Microsoft team-based site, and it might be an internal team area, or in OneDrive. We're then iterating through that content in that area, getting feedback from peers. There's some review going on, and then maybe an approval process. So you might be taking it, creating, iterating it, get a review, sharing it with the rest of the team. And so you're going from that internal team site where it's being worked upon to then being published into a SharePoint communication site. So, thinking of an HR policy, the HR team might be working internally in their HR Microsoft team workspace, but then when they want the rest of the organization to be able to consume that, then they then copy that over into their HR department site, where it can be consumed.
And this is the first level where we tend to see that separation between where do you do the work to create the content and where do you display the content. And I know that when we try to build new intranets, that's a big change in the way we've used SharePoint in particular in the past, where we've typically put everything into a container and then tried to parcel it out using permissions. And that's applied to some of the other apps and services in Microsoft 365 too. Separating those two activity streams, I think, is very powerful. Whatever the iteration and review process is for an HR policy, like Simon is talking about, is going to be very different than potentially a change to a timesheet or something. So you want to make sure that you're letting people exercise those processes and privacy in a sense, and then publishing the output of that process to some place that people can consume it if it's that kind of content.
Yeah, I totally agree, Mark. It also reduces the burden on the users as well, so that someone, like when you've got one bucket, they think, oh, I put it in the wrong place, and they've suddenly shared it, by using a Microsoft team and keeping those permissions very separate. They can feel sort of safe and secure that they're working on something which might, it's not going to get mistakenly leaked. So yeah, it's a great architecture. Okay, so then moving to level 400, and there's a question which has come in as well, which we'll pick up after this. So then level 400.
Excuse me, do you mind closing the reminders? It's a bit distracting. And it's in the middle of the screen.
Sorry. Thank you very much. You don't really want to see that, do you? I hadn't even noticed. Apologies. Good old Outlook. Right. Yeah, level 400. Now we are, we're taking that further on, and then we're looking at how we can get feedback back in from sharing it in the communication site and getting feedback from the people who are consuming that content, and then applying that back into the create, iterate steps, so that we can publish a new version and make it better. So that's really where level 400. So we're starting to get measurements. Maybe people are, again, we talk about search, but searching for certain terms, or maybe using terms which we haven't mentioned in the document, and we might need to add into that document. So improving that findability. So yeah, that's sort of the difference between level 300, level 400, and then on a slightly different perspective, we then have also can start thinking about about how we might use some of the compliance and regulatory governance and regulatory compliance features to be able to manage the life cycle, put protection around it. We've got the ability with reporting to be able to get some metrics on usage and the monitoring of that content. And then this kind of leads into the level 500, which now we're just wrapping AI around it. But again, I think this is where actually the AI now is coming down the levels. Really, we should probably think about pushing this down to level 400. But we can start extending the content setup. So we're using auto tagging. We're starting to use AI to tag the metadata. We could start using machine learning to help the classification of the content. We can get some enhanced analytics coming through from those AI tools, and we might start using more automation to manage all of those things. And the level sort of 500 kind of nirvana, if we come to that sort of initial kind of process, is thinking about how we take now content which is maybe being created internally, making that available externally, and then feeding that back into the organization. So we're kind of getting those content management loops from content that's being consumed outside the organization.
Which actually sort of leads us to Frank's question indirectly. He's asking about when you share content with external people, which isn't really the point of this slide, but they have to use the native Word and Excel applications. I didn't think that was true. I thought that they could also use the browser apps as an external user.
Well, I think Frank is saying that the because maybe it's got some features in the Word in the content which the web app doesn't support.
Got it.
So I mean, we do this. So Marc, all of the maturity model stuff lives in the Sympraxis tenant, and Marc invites us as guest users using our Microsoft Entra accounts, and then I can open up. I've got this presentation using my PowerPoint native application. You can use the native Word. The thing they have to do is they have to sign in. It's actually they have to make sure that they're signed in using their Microsoft Entra ID. But the fact that you're using the same identity, it just happens to have access into it's leveling Entra B2B. So yeah, you would invite them into your organization.
We haven't set up, Simon, you're not set up in our tenant as a B2B ID. So
I am. You invited me as a guest. So my Simon at iThink 365 account is in your Sympraxis tenant as a guest.
Sure, but B2B is actually establishing a trust between our two organizations, I thought, right?
I guess we are.
Maybe not.
Yeah, it's not a true. It's not.
Maybe I'm splitting hairs here.
Yeah, it's not a true like a synchronization, but you have added my identity into your tenant as a guest, and then given my identity access to that team area, and I can open those contents. So
in any case, if people are feeling that they need to use the desktop apps instead of the browser apps, I think that distinction is becoming less and less. I think the reasons for wanting to do that are less and less. Some of it is just habit. Oh, I don't like the browser thing, so I'm going to open in the desktop app. I think the key there would be to find out what are the specific things that people can't do, and figure out if that's actually the case, and work with them on that.
Oh, I see. So sorry. The issue is that Frank is saying that the external contact is not in M365.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I can see that being a problem because in the Word client, you need to log in as a you need to log in as the account, which is also then got permissions to the content, which you've given permissions to that content in your tenant. So yeah, they would need to have an M365 account. I can't think how that would work otherwise. The only other thing I've seen is where you can choose if you've got multiple accounts. Sometimes if you've got an account which doesn't have access to your tenant or your content is higher up, then it doesn't work. But
I think the worst thing is when you have somebody external who has a very old version of the Office apps, which happens more often than it should, and people can't do the thing, or they can't actually use the documents that they've had shared with them. That's probably a bigger barrier, but that can be a problem. And then you don't have that account logic, in other words.
Yeah, so Frank's just popped in an image of saying guest account versus ad hoc external recipient. So I guess someone with a Gmail account, they would be an ad hoc external recipient, whereas a guest account would be fundamentally backed by a Microsoft Entra ID account.
There was a question about accessibility, which I have to admit I'm not sure we touch on in this competency. We've kicked around the idea of having an accessibility competency, which seems a bit too isolated. It's really something that probably should apply across all competencies. So if, let's see who asked that, Beatrice, if you have any ideas about how we could sort of feather that accessibility thinking into this competency, I'd love to hear about it. I mean, level 100 is easy. We don't think about it. But then what the different levels would be as we're thinking about content would be awesome.
Yeah.
Hi. So I know there has been some sessions about accessibility in this round. That's how I came up with these maturity assessments. And I was wondering if that is only like you have a maturity model for the accessibility features within Office or within Microsoft, or if that's also really embedded in the whole setup of the maturity, because I think it would be probably optimal to have it embedded in all the capacities. Because, for example, if we're talking about content creation, you have the accessibility checker. So that is information that you can probably track and follow up on, and there can be some reports made. I realize now there's like, if you go on the cloud version, you have accessibility last checked, and then it tells you what time that was checked. So I'm guessing you have access, there's access somewhere to this information, and that could be part of the maturity also in this content creation area.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. We should figure out how to add that in. Like I said, any thoughts that you could share with us, if that's something you're paying a lot of attention to, that would be great to hear.
So that the place to provide the feedback would be in some SharePoint or in the GitHub, or
you can go to GitHub and just create an issue so that we can discuss it, or you can even put in a pull request for, if you know how to use GitHub, and I don't want to make that assumption.
I can.
You could just put in a pull request on the articles, and if you're adding good content, we're going to accept those changes and get them published.
I don't need to be like a Microsoft region leader or MVP or anything like that.
No, not at all.
Nope. If you go to the articles, when you're just reading them, there's a little pencil up to the right that takes you to the GitHub repo. Would love to get your thoughts on that. That would be great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for bringing it up.
Thanks, Beatrice. Cool.
Let's see. We had another question. Oh, the governance, retention, and compliance competency as an input to content management. I think we try to cover that in the 2 slides before this one, Simon.
Let me go back.
Where we have that extra layer, or actually the slide before this one. We've got those 2 discs sort of stacked because they tend to be thought about a bit separately, even though they're obviously very related. So that top disc is supposed to be the connection to the GRC competency. We probably should. We published that GRC competency and didn't come back and look at this competency to make specific ties. So again, if you have ideas, Kevin, that would be awesome. You're giving us some great feedback in many different ways. Keep it up.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any more sort of suggestions, thoughts, things we're missing or shouldn't be in there?
Managing page or news post lifecycle. I think site pages need to be treated just like any other content. And sometimes we even create separate content types for those site pages libraries, so that some pages or news posts or some different flavor of pages can be managed in different ways. Usually a content type is managed differently than other content types. So that can be a helpful way to sort of segregate how you want things to work. I do think that people need to continually manage the farm. And by farm, I mean like growing plants, right? You have to treat your site pages library as a bed of plants, and you need to weed, and you need to fertilize, and you need to cull, and all of the things that you do to manage a good garden. So whatever that cycle should be, can be reflected in the content types and or metadata that you apply to that particular library, but it's augmentation to that library as it comes out of the box. You have to be a little careful about how you change that library because it is a special library, and it's sort of a one of those per site. But you can do a lot of the same content management activities around site pages.
Marc was also asking about what about content for sharing with end users or anything like WalkMe that can be used to help with interactive guidance. I mean, Frank, are you thinking that this is something which we should put into the maturity model, or is it just looking for some examples of third-party products or products or ways of doing this?
Yeah, one of the things I find to be, I figure it's just easier for me to chat. One of the things I find that's, no worries. One of the things I find that's difficult for when we're working with end users is communicating some of these practices effectively for them, and then continuously enforcing that with them and working through them with that. And so I was wondering if within the maturity model we should be accounting for the communications to the end users and what that would look like, so that we can then have some sort of tools like, say, a WalkMe or some other solution set that's more interactive, so that as you work towards that adoption model, you can give them things when they need it, right? Here are the content types, here's how it's explained, here's the use cases for it, the trajectory of the document as it's moving through that flow, right? It's easy for us as admins to understand those things, have all the diagrams we want, the documentation. Where we need it, though, is with the end users. Like, those are the people that really need information. And so one of the things I was hoping for is maybe we can start thinking about how we can present that information to them in a meaningful way when it matters to them.
Right.
Yeah.
We do have a communication competency, which isn't to push this off to that side, but I think things like the communication strategy and how you think about getting messages out from wherever to the larger organization, we try to cover there. And obviously there are some different tool sets that come into play there, like Viva Engage and Viva Amplify, that are potentially other tools instead of SharePoint or alongside SharePoint, for example, that would help with those content management capabilities and the level of interactivity too. There's a difference between just telling people a bunch of stuff and having a dialogue around it. So I think each organization needs to think about what their communication strategy is, and then how does that affect their content management strategy. They're clearly very connected. This is another one of those gray area places in the model, I think.
Yeah, I guess, like Kevin was saying, staff and training, but also that might be a good example of a sort of how to elevate, as part of the how to elevate, things you could do to help bring the users along on the journey to put up the maturity level. So yeah, sort of like a supporting document or supporting content. But yeah, I think it's interesting.
Well, we're losing our crowd. I think we need to wrap this up. So if you want to follow us on Twitter, I got to admit we don't necessarily use that as much as we probably could. Our next call will be September 17th, where we have a practical scenario around Copilot. There's some links there that will get you to content. The two at the bottom, the YouTube recordings and the slide decks from all of these sessions that we've done historically, are available to each and every one of you as soon as we publish the slides from this thing, which will be right after the call.
Thanks all. Have great weeks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Marc.